Today we're going to talk about running biomechanics, the good, the bad, and the, well, you know. I got interested in running injuries. I grew up a swimmer, and so I can make the joke, if you're a swimmer, you're usually not a very good runner. And runners are only made to run by their coaches when the coaches need to go get a cup of coffee, because no swimmer ever got to be a better swimmer by going and running. It's one of those sports specificity things. I got interested in running when I was in med school, when you didn't have time to go to the pool when it was open and get a shower and all that kind of stuff, so I started running. And it's good to be 22 years old and run, because you can do a lot of stupid things and you can still get away with those things. But as I got a little bit older, had a little bit more problems, and actually learned of all the mistakes I was making, and I've had enough injuries. I think I got to be an expert in running injuries just because I've had all of them. And I see some patients, I will not HIPAA violate who they are, who have come in my office for their running injuries. And I take care of about 30% adults, so it's never too late. So we're going to talk a little bit about the biomechanics of running. We'll also talk, they asked to talk a little bit about exertional compartment syndrome, which is something that I think pediatricians in general think about, but I think when you have somebody with shin splints, you at least need to think of what are some of the mimics that could be there. And then they also wanted to talk a little bit about foot pain in the runner. And again, there's so many things in the foot that can hurt. That'll be a little bit more of the smorgasbord at the end, but I really want to concentrate on number 1 and number 2. So yeah, runners are different. We do different things. We don't care where we do them, whether it's in the bank line or whatever, but it's very common. Young runners are often your highly motivated kids, the high GPAs. They're very well disciplined. They're fun to work with. They follow instructions as long as you don't tell them that they can't run. I think it also attracts those people who may have some anxiety and depression, and part of their physical activity is part of their management of those mental health issues. So I think you always, when you're talking with runners, you always need to think about that there may also be something else going on that you need to be aware of. So the basics of running gait. In stance is when your foot starts to hit the ground. As your foot starts to hit the ground, you have a general knee flexion and internal rotation moment. So I'm not going to get into advanced biomechanics, but just remember internal rotation and flexion when your foot hits the ground. As we kind of get through shock absorption, this is when the soft tissues are absorbing the shock. When we get into mid stance, your foot is directly over the hip, and this is where we do so much of our analysis in the office. It's not a perfect gait analysis, but it tells us a lot of what's going on before and after. So after you get into mid stance, you start getting into propulsion and toe off. And the exact opposite things happen than when your foot hits the ground. So instead of internal rotation and flexion, you're getting external rotation and extension. So again, this is one of those things that if you just kind of keep that in mind, if you're stuck in one side or the other a little bit more, it may give you an idea of where the biomechanics are and how you can kind of take care of things. Swing phase is pretty nice. Not a lot of bad things happen in the swing phase, but there are indicators when we look at a biomechanical analysis that happen in the swing phase that are trying to compensate for things when their foot's on the ground. So what else is happening? The upper torso and arms should be moving equal and opposite to maintain your momentum. So again, as the normal runner happens, when your left knee goes up, your right arm goes forward, because again, this keeps you balanced. You should have this reciprocation to maintain your momentum. As you look at this, you see the first picture has pretty good stability in the shoulders and in the hips, and you can see how there's excessive rotation of the shoulders as they're bringing them through and in the hips, and that may be that they're not using their stability muscles that Darren was talking about, the core. Are they able to have some stable foundation in the mid, or is this just rotating from side to side? So hip stability prevents the motion and stress. The most common injury in running are knee injuries. Knee is usually the victim of the crime, though. It's not usually the problem because you're not strong enough, those kind of things. It's usually coming from the hip. And the problem happens when your foot is hitting the ground. You will get into that. This is the shock absorption stage, and then you get into mid stance. And when we get into mid stance here, you can see how the hip starts to drop, the knee starts to go into valgus, and you will have some internal rotation. So in general, you're going to be doing this. And when you do this, you're putting excessive stress on the inside of your shin, the inside of your knee, your quad, and your hip. So much of what we look for is, what are you doing with your upper body? So if you're very strong, everything's all good. If you start to weaken, then the hip starts to go out some. And when that hip goes out some, the opposite arm is going to swing up to try to get you there. So when I'm looking at somebody run, I could like sit at Memorial Park all day and watch people run. I think that would be so cool to do. But just watch what's going on with the hip, what's going on with the arm. So if one arm is doing this, you know that it's the left hip is their problem because their right arm is giving them away. So these are little tips that you can do. I know that not everybody has a treadmill in their office. And to be honest with you, I don't use the treadmill in my office very often. But when you need it, you can. But again, you may have them go out to the track and take some video and bring it back so you can take a look at it. I am not a podiatrist, but I'm like a closet foot and ankle guy. I think the foot is extremely elegant, what it has to do for you. So from a function standpoint, it needs to be a shock absorber. Every time your foot hits the ground when you run, you put about 3 or 4 times your body weight across your joints. It has to be a shock absorber. It has to be somewhat soft. But it also needs to be a rigid lever, so when you push off, you actually go somewhere. So those are kind of different ends of the spectrum. So you have to be soft, but you also need to be rigid. This is where we get into the pronation and supination in the foot and ankle. Pronation, everybody goes, oh, you're a pronator. Well, everybody should have a little bit of pronation because that's normal. So pronation is when your foot rolls into internal rotation and everts normally when your foot hits the ground. What that does is when it gets into pronation, the ligaments and the muscles relax the most so the bones can move as much as they can. So it's a very good shock absorber. So that's why it happens in that part of the gait. When your foot's hitting the ground, you want to be soft and cushy. Then as your body weight gets over your foot and starts to get into toe off and extension, then it rolls back out into supination. Supination puts all those bones right next to each other and makes it as stiff as possible. So you do need to pronate some, and you do need to supinate some to be an effective runner. So it's not that you're a pronator or a supinator. You may be an overpronator or an oversupinator, and those oftentimes are made worse by the problems up in the hip. So you can imagine if your hip is going out like this and you get into this phase, you're going to dive even more, and that's going to give you what looks like a pronation problem. So what are we looking for? Feet and hips. So foot strike. So if you look at the average runner over at Memorial Park, probably 80% of them are going to be rear foot strikers. They're going to land with the back of the lateral side of their heel as they're coming down. In general, the guys who are winning the Houston Marathon are forefoot strikers. They're running on their toes. They're freaks of nature. This is not what we should base our optimal biomechanics on. When you look at the optimal mechanics, probably midfoot striking is a lot more efficient. It's a lot more safe for your recreational runner. So if I'm out there and I see somebody who runs horribly, if they make one loop around Memorial running 2 or 3 miles, it's probably not long enough to get hurt. But I always say marathon training will find your biomechanical problems and tell you where they are. Because when you start to get weak and you get tired at like mile 15, that little wiggle you had is like a huge honking wiggle, and then your connective tissues start to bother you. When you are heel striking, your foot is so far out in front of you that your center of gravity is behind, and you have a deceleration motion every time your foot hits the ground. So it's not very efficient because you're losing all that momentum every time your foot hits the ground. It's also extremely difficult to maintain hip stability when your foot is all the way out in front of you. Now, when you mid-strike, basically you're shortening your stride so you're right here. Your momentum continues forward so you don't have that jerk of a deceleration moment every time, and it's extremely easy to maintain your balance when your foot is a lot closer to your center of gravity. So it doesn't fix everything, but being a midfoot striker with higher cadence actually really helps out quite a bit with keeping out of my office. We also will look at the degree of pronation and supination in the foot, but to me, the Trendelenburg hip. So my fellows have been in Houston for 5 weeks now, and they have heard me every day going, what did the single leg squat look like? Because the single leg squat when you're standing really gives you so much information. Are they doing one of these things because they can't? Or are they throwing their body over to the side? Because you know when they run, that's what they're going to be doing as well. this is kind of looks at this with the idea that when you're heel striking here, this has this little moment here of increased body force here. When you're hitting with your midfoot, you lose that. So again, not only are you more efficient, you're keeping your forward momentum, but you're also getting less reactive forces going up through that will give you shin splints and knee pain and all those other kind of good things. Those of you who are runners, there was a book about 8 or 10 years ago called Born to Run. And it was about the Tarahumara Indians in rural Mexico. And there are these people who have no cars, and they just run everywhere to get their stuff. The average Indian runs about 18 miles a day. So these people have been running for centuries. And so they went down, they had a bunch of these elite distance runners, and they ran a race between the Indian guys and these guys. But these guys ran, they would go to the garbage dump and find old tires and basically cut the rubber out and use leather thongs to put them on the bottom of their feet so they didn't cut them, and that was their running shoes. And this is where the whole barefoot running kind of craze kind of got a lot of momentum. So if you were born in rural Mexico and you ran 18 miles a day, you probably had pretty good biomechanics or you didn't survive very well. But the lessons of barefoot running are that if you have a higher cadence and a midfoot strike and stable hips, you do very well, whether you have shoes on or not. So that's my problem, is that the thing they talk about with barefoot running is that if you have pain, you have to change your biomechanics so that you optimize your mechanics there. In the United States, if you have pain, you stop, take a couple weeks off, you go back and do it again, and then you wonder, why did this come back? Well, you're doing the same thing, because I don't think we're sophisticated enough to know how to change our biomechanics. So I think that's the fatal flaw in barefoot running, is we don't know what to do when something hurts. So I don't think barefoot running is bad. We've learned a lot of great lessons of midfoot striking and hip stability and increased cadence, but I don't think you need to throw out your running shoes. It's excessive pronation. So again, the question is this because of the way his foot was made, or is this happening because of the way his hip is firing and how much weight he's carrying and the amount of drive that he's getting in internal rotation when his foot hits the ground? Just recapitulates that whole internal rotation flexion moment when you're getting into mid stance. So it's cool to have good strong hips. So these are very elite runners, but you can see very different patterns on these folks, and you can kind of see that again as the foot's hitting there here, but you can see how the knee is dropping in and rolling the hips back and forth. So again, it's very, very important, but you can get to an elite level even with relatively weak hips. So it's one of those things when I'm taking care of our high school and collegiate athletes, we can get some very good runners, that it's good to be young because your connective tissues can handle it, but there's going to be a point where they don't, and then they end up in our offices. So again, this is more pictures of saying just what I said. So when you're out at Memorial Park, which group of people are you seeing? All right, is it the ones that are kind of leaning back and they're overstriding, heel striking, putting a lot of force on there? Or do they have this nice lean through here? Their foot is hitting close to their center of gravity. They have good hip extension. That's what, again, I think we need to work toward. Texas Children's, we just opened a Gait lab about a year and a half ago. And we've been doing some other research on Gait, but we have some ideas about running Gait and how can we have our young people learn how to do these things early so you don't have to have the injuries and then relearn it again. I think it's real exciting stuff. How can these runners are always hurt? Again, their form, if they're shortening their stride length, their midfoot striking, fatigability, the coaches playing in and out of season, are they keeping strong? Are they going to sit on the couch all summer long? And then Steve's going to talk about nutrition, but cross-country kids don't eat enough calories to meet the number of the caloric needs of their running. So again, I think we've got to optimize that as well as their micronutrients. The shin splints, again, everybody, when a runner comes in and their shins are hurting, it's okay, you've got medial tibial stress syndrome because the stress is on your medial tibia. That's why we all went to medical school, to use big words for something that's kind of common sense, but not so fast. It may not be. Exertional compartment syndrome is something that we see in runners that can mimic that because it's kind of in the same general area, but it has some different characteristics. So when medial tibial stress syndrome, in my mind, is a precursor to a stress fracture. So as you continue to valgus, the bone starts to get a periostitis, may get some reactive marrow edema. But an exertional compartment syndrome is caused by the things we think about in a compartment syndrome. The pressure is being elevated in that compartment, and when the pressure gets too high, then the blood vessels cannot perfuse those muscles anymore, and you start getting the crampic claudication type pain in that compartment. Classically, it will happen at the same point in their run, about 15 to 20 minutes into that. And then if they stop, it will resolve relatively quickly. Those of you who have had shin splints know that when you stop because your shins are hurting, it does not go away in 15 to 20 minutes. You kind of hobble around for the rest of the day. So again, if you get somebody who says, yeah, my shin splints go away as soon as I stop, that should be one of those red flags of, this may not be your garden variety medial tibial stress syndrome. If they say, boy, my muscles are like rock hard when I'm running, again, it's another one of those, meaning the pressure may be increasing in that compartment, giving them the problem. And then they may have neurologic findings. The nerve that is in that compartment is almost like the canary in the coal mine of telling you when there's a problem, because it's most sensitive to ischemia even before other structures are. So if you start getting numbness and tingling in the right compartment, so medical school picture for everybody to look at. So there's 4 different compartments, and the anterior and the deep posterior compartment are the 2 that probably give you the most common. The deep perineal nerve and the tibial nerve are the 2 that are in those compartments. If you want to look back on the website and look at this slide, this is where the money is. So if you check, there's altered sensation down between their first and second toe, you're going deep perineal nerve, this could be an anterior compartment syndrome. So this is one that will not respond to the usual things we do with shin splints. And needs to have look at their biomechanics so that we can make things better. There's a lot of things that we can do, but I think the biggest thing is that a compartment measurement at rest and with exertion is one of the things that can be the most diagnostic, because we'll see elevated pressures. The question is how elevated, and there's some debate about how high the pressures need to be. But if you have a clinical suspicion, that's something to send to us or to our orthopedic comrades. All right. The whiz bang boom through the foot. Okay, so this is my slide from my up-to-date chapter that has all the places that hurt and what is it that's there. So if you want to look at the up-to-date, you can kind of look at that. But again, I think the location gives you a lot of help. How often do you guys see calcaneal apophysitis in your office? All the time. Okay, you do not necessarily need to get x-rays on that. You treat that with the heel cups, with stretching, with icing, modifying their activity. Achilles tendonitis and plantar fasciitis is weird in kids. If you get like a high school athlete who's a cross-country runner and they're running a whole bunch, they can get Achilles tendonitis and plantar fasciitis. But an 8 or 10, 12-year-old kid, you got to look for other things. So lateral ankle peroneal tendonitis, again, we talked about how when you get into the propulsion phase of gait, you have external rotation and extension. Sometimes the peroneal will try to do that, and that's why you'll get the tendonitis, because they're trying to make up for excessive pronation and stance. You also get pain on the medial side, because again, as you're really loading on the inside, your posterior tibialis, Tom, Dick, and Harry, as you remember from medical school, are getting tired of trying to compensate from everything above. You can also get the tarsal nerve in there. Midfoot pain. So if it's where the laces are on their shoes, there's 2 problems. One, they're tying their shoes up too tight. Could be one. But number 2, they could have calf tightness. And if they're not having proper flexibility in their calf, they oftentimes will get that extra dorsiflexion and plantar flexion from their midfoot. Forefoot is the common place for stress fractures at the second Met. You can also get Freiberg's infarction. I've been looking for 25 years for that, and it shows up on my boards, but I've never seen it in clinic. So if you have a female, late teens, second Met, get an x-ray. And if you get one, you have to show it to me, because I'm still looking for my first. So the key points: biomechanically, grossly analyzing, look at where the foot is hitting the ground. Is it the rear foot or is it the midfoot? Are the hips and arms in mid stance? Are they flying away, or are they driving through, or are they crossing the midline? Are their hips stable, or are they Trendelenburging? The knee is usually the victim of the crime. Lower leg pain is not always shin splints. You have to worry about the hard muscles that may have neurologic findings, and their pain goes away relatively quickly after they stop. And thank you very much.